from, we say, in the winter season when we have rain. I'll come to the southern hemisphere in a minute, but in the northern hemisphere, the rainy season is in the winter. Well, it's in the winter in the southern hemisphere as well, but I mean, it's in the later months of the year. So why do we start saying it in Israel on the 7th of Cheshvan? What is so special about the 7th of Cheshvan? We have already started to say Mashiv Haruach Umorid HaGeshem from Shmini Atzeret. Mashiv Haruach Umorid HaGeshem means we are praising God as one who causes the wind to blow and the rains to fall. It's not a request for rain, it's a statement. The statement is God is the one who causes the rain to fall. That's Mashiv Haruach Umorid HaGeshem. V'tein talu mata livracha is a request. We say it in the bracha of Mevarech Hashanim. Barech Aleinu, bless us. We say to Hashem, bless us. May this year be a blessed year. And in part of that blessing that we ask for is for the rains to come livracha, for a bracha. So it's two slightly different things. Mashiv HaRuach is a statement of fact. God is the one that causes the rain. V'tein talu mata livracha is a request for us to have rain, a request from Hashem. So it's quite simple why in the land of Israel we don't start saying V'tein talu mata livracha straight after Sukkot, which is when we really should start saying it, because that's when the rainy season begins. And the simple reason is a practical one, that in the times when the people were Ole Regel, they went up to Jerusalem to celebrate the three foot festivals, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. The majority of people still lived in Chutz La'aretz, namely Bavel. You'll recall that after the destruction of the first temple, we all got exiled over to Bavel, Iraq. And that's where we stayed until the second temple was rebuilt. And then some of us went back from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. But as we've said many times during this shiur, there remained, the majority of the people remained in Bavel. So the majority of the of Am Yisrael still lived in Bavel. So when they came to be Ola Regel, when they came to do their pilgrimage to Jerusalem, after Sukkot, they had to go home again. And they probably were taking Ryanair or El Al because it took them 2 weeks to get home. They were very slow at doing so. And it took 2 weeks, generally speaking, for the Olim to get back from Jerusalem to where they lived in Bavel. And so, in order so that they wouldn't have a more difficult journey, because they didn't want to be caught in the rain, or we didn't want that they would be caught in the rain and made muddy roads and all that stuff, makes it very much more difficult to travel. We delayed requesting the rain until the 7th of Cheshvan to give them 2 weeks to get back to Bavel. So you'll ask me the obvious question. Most Jews don't live in Bavel anymore. In fact, I think the Jewish population of Iraq is now numbered in the tens as opposed to hundreds. And so why are we still bothered about the Jews of Iraq traveling? And also nowadays, when we don't make Ole Regel anyway, why do we not just say V'tein talu mata livracha straight after Sukkot? And that would be a very good question for which I do not have a satisfactory answer, except to say that this was something instituted by the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, the men of the Great Assembly, similar to the second day of Yom Tov, which is similarly redundant today. And I can tell you that when I become Rosh Sanhedrin, Yom Tov Sheni and the V'tein talu mata in its right place will be restored to sanity. But until then, we have to stick with what the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah made up at that time, and therefore we are. That's why we say it on the 7th of Cheshvan. I'll come to you in a sec, Paul. I'll just explain why in Chutz La'aretz we don't say it on the 7th of Cheshvan, because that is an equally irrational reason, and it's also to do with Bavel. Now, in Chutz La'aretz, we say we start saying the Tein Talumat Livracha on the evening before the 5th of December, or the evening before the 6th of December, the year before a civil leap year. The maths is a bit complicated, and for those of you who are interested in the maths, I'll send out a link to a very good explanation of how the maths work. But in principle, how it works is this, that the Jews in Bavel needed rain later than the Jews in Eretz Israel. Apparently, in Iraq, the rainy season is later and the requirement for rain is later. So they made the rabbis in Bavel decided that they would ask for rain 60 days after the equinox. Now, it's not the equinox as we know it, because there was a change in the calendars. There was a change in the 16th century from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar. And the days got all mixed up. And in one year, they jumped from the 5th of October to the 15th of October overnight. And they lost 10 days. And then they've lost various other days. I'll send you the thing about the maths. Doesn't matter how the maths work out, right, for this moment. But basically, 60 days after the equinox works out to be around about the 4th of December, 5th of December. And that is when we start saying Talumata Livracha in Chutz La'aretz. So the reason that we do it wherever you are in Chutz La'aretz is based on the needs of the Jews in Iraq. Now, once the Jews no longer lived, all of them lived in Iraq, and some of them went to live elsewhere, including the Southern Hemisphere, it was decided that since most of the Jews live in the Northern Hemisphere, the Jews in the Southern Hemisphere should say their tefillot for the benefit of the majority of the Jews in the world who live in the Northern Hemisphere, which is why if you live in the Southern Hemisphere, you will say V'tein Talumata Livracha in your summer, and you will say V'tein Baracha in your winter, upside down. So in the Southern Hemisphere, you are saying the prayers for Jews in Chutz La'aretz in the Northern Hemisphere, which is also a little bit irrational, because you would expect that if you're not going to pray for the Jews in your own area, that you would actually pray for the Jews in Eretz Israel. And so it would be more rational, in my humble opinion, that the Jews in the Southern Hemisphere would say V'tein Talumata Livracha from the 7th of Cheshvan, because they will be praying in the same way as the Jews of Israel. But that's not how the halacha is pasken. The halacha is pasken that in Israel we begin on the 7th of Cheshvan, and everywhere else in the world we begin 60 days after the equinox. And the reason is because of the Babylonian Jews at the time of the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. So that's why we do it. Very simple halacha. If you forget to say V'tein Talumata Livracha, if you forget and you remember before you have said Baruch Atah Hashem Mevarech Hashanim, then you can say it. You just go back to the beginning of that bracha and say it. If you've already said Baruch Atah Hashem Mevarech Hashanim, then you can say it in Shema Kolenu before Ki Ata Shomea Tefillah. You can say V'tein Talumata Livracha there. And if you forget that and you remember before you start Ritzei, you can say it before Ritzei. And if you forget it altogether until after Ritzei, then you have to start all over again, which is not the case in the summer if you say V'tein Talamata Livracha instead of V'tein Baracha, because you've actually said V'tein Baracha and you've just said extra words of talu matar. But in the winter, if you don't say talu matar, then you have to repeat the Shemona Esrei. That is a whistle-stop tour through V'tein talu matar livracha. Paul, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, just that my brother-in-law told me. Actually, you're right that it's a mistake. That it should be in Chutz La'aretz. It should actually be the 21st of November. So to cover up their mistake, the Rebbeinu created a rabbinic equinox, which is not the real equinox.
Correct. The little bit of maths thing that I'm going to send you out explains that in some detail, how the 22nd of November or 21st of November suddenly became the 4th of December. It's all to do with the change in the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar. Of course, the rabbinic calculations were based on the Julian calendar because the Gregorian calendar didn't come out until the 16th century. And then when the 16th century Gregorian calendar came out, they had to change it all over, and you'll see how it actually got there. I don't want to spend any more time on it, but 1 second. I'll send you out the calculations, and then anyone that's got any questions can email me. Yes, Marcel.
Just to tell you that the Julian calendar only finished in Eastern Europe in 1919.
That's
1919.
Interesting. That's interesting, and that's of course why they have different dates for Christmas and all sorts of things.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yes, John.
Did you say you have to repeat the Shemona Esrei if you don't say saying talu matar?
If you forget V'tein talu matar livracha completely, you have to repeat. Yes.
Because in the message you sent this morning, said if you forget, you do not repeat the Amida.
Yeah, if you look, I deleted that message afterwards because I made a mistake. I got mixed up with the summer, so I deleted that message. It shouldn't still say that, so I'll send the proper one round.
Okay, sorry, thank you.
You're right. I did say that this morning, and then once I'd written that, I thought, hang on a minute, that's not right. And
I'll be back in a minute then.
I realised that I got mixed up, so I deleted it. But you obviously got in there before I deleted it.
I'll be back in a minute then.
Okay, right. Okay, let's go back to our story. We are in Shoftim now. Thank you, first of all, to David Marks, who sent me some really interesting stuff to read over Shabbat. One of the problems I had was that I printed it like I normally do. I do everything at the very, very last minute. And at the very last minute, I printed the stuff out that he gave me without looking at it, thinking I'll just pull it off my desk on Shabbat afternoon to read. Unfortunately, one of the things that I printed looked like that. I don't know if you can see it, but it's so small that I would need a microscope to read it. So yes, David Marks is holding it up on his thing. So I did actually manage to use my wife's sewing glasses, which are about +20, and then right up here, and I managed to actually read this thing, and it was worth it because it was really, really interesting. And what I propose to do, there's so much stuff in there that I want to share with you, that what I propose to do is this. I want to get through to the end of the chapter and go through the story and finish Tanakh. And then I want to spend probably a whole shiur going through various things about this story, which are fascinating and lead us to various different conclusions about the role of women and how the Torah sees women and how the Bnei Yisrael at that time were viewing women. And so it's a very, very fascinating subject. And we could do it now in the middle of the story, but I would prefer, thank you for starting the recording, Avril, I've just noticed that you did that. I don't want to do it now because I actually want to finish the story so that we've got the whole thing in context before we come back to that. But just to give you a little taster, one of the things that I read in the various things that David had sent me and some other stuff that I also found reminded me of the story which I had mentioned quite recently. I can't remember in what context I mentioned it, But I mentioned the story about the guy in the Holocaust who had a pair of tefillin and was trading the use of his tefillin for bread rations. And somebody said, oh, a terrible thing. How can you do such a terrible thing that you're willing to take somebody else's bread rations in order for them to use your tefillin? How awful of you. And somebody else pointed out, but what you've omitted to see is how many people were willing to trade their bread to use the tefillin. Depends on which way you look at this thing. And one of the things that I read in here, which I just want to give you a little taster of really, is this. We all said, and we all agreed, and it's fact, that the way this woman was treated by the people of Giv'ah, the way she was treated by her husband, being thrown out to the wolves, as it were, and I use that word wolves advisedly because they were men of Binyamin, and Binyamin is called Binyamin Ze'ev Yitrof. That was the bracha that he was given. Benjamin will be a ravaging wolf. And perhaps when Yaakov gave him that bracha, that was something that Yaakov foresaw. We're told, the Midrash tells us that Yaakov, when he gathered his children, wanted to tell them what would go on in the end of days, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu prevented him from doing so. And perhaps this was an allusion to the behavior of Binyamin. But be that as it may, that terrible behavior is to be condemned, of course. But what is remarkable, if you think about the position of women and of concubines and women as chattels, I think that was a word that was used by somebody in the shiur last week. If you think about the reaction of the rest of Bnei Israel to what these people did, the whole of the people were outraged by this. And that, I think, is an interesting fact and an interesting pointer that we need to discuss. Why didn't the people, if the fact is that women are just chattels, why didn't they just say, who cares? It's just a woman anyway. I'm not bothered. Get on with your life. Don't start sending pieces round to me and trying to get the whip up a frenzy against Binyamin. So what? So they raped a concubine, big deal. But they didn't, did they? They gathered, as we're about to see, and tragic events ensued from it. But the fact that they were outraged by it is another interesting side to this story, which I want to go into in some detail when we get to the end of the chapter and we finish the story. So that's just a little idea of where we need how we need to look at this in the various different angles that we see. In other words, I suppose what I'm saying is there's always two sides to every coin, and we must be careful to look at both of them, which we will do in some detail. So with that little introduction, which has taken us a bit of time, about 20 minutes, so sorry about that, but there you go. We will carry on in the chapter. I'm going to put it on the screen. If I can find it, where are we? Wait a minute, I haven't got it yet. Let me just get it up. Sorry, I did get it ready, but I don't know where it's gone. There it is. There it is. Okay. All right, can we see the screen, everyone? Yeah, okay. Right, Leon, please unmute. And let's go from verse 11. We'll just repeat the last two verses that we did last week. From verse 11, please.
Then all the people of Israel gathered together at the city as one man, as comrades. The tribes of Israel then sent men through all the clans of Benjamin, saying, "What is this outrage that occurred among you? Now turn over the lawless men who are in Gibeah, and we will put them to death and eliminate the evil from Israel." But the children of Benjamin refused to heed the voice of their brothers, the children of Israel. The children of Benjamin were gathered together from the cities to Gibeah to go out to war with the children of Israel.
Let's just stop there, Leon. So this is where we ended last week. The people of Israel say to the people of Binyamin, hand over the perpetrators and we'll deal with them. And implication, and the rest of you will not need to get involved. Just you've not dealt with the perpetrators within your tribe as you should have done. Remember, we have in the Torah, we have the mitzvah at the beginning of Parashat Shoftim, as opposed to Sefer Shoftim. Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha b'chol she'orecha. You shall put judges and officers in the gates, in all of your gates, meaning that every tribe, every city has to have a justice system. And what the Bnei Israel are saying to Binyamin here is that you haven't brought these men to justice. So you haven't brought them to justice, hand them over to us and we'll do it. And Binyamin does not do so. They refuse to listen. And what they do is instead is they gather in order to go out to battle with the Bnei Israel. And here we have, we already had at the end, earlier on in the chapter, end of last week's shiur, the Bnei Israel had gathered at Mitzpah, and I showed you the map of Mitzpah, where it was just on the border of the territory of Binyamin. So the Bnei Israel are gathered in Mitzpah, and the Bnei Binyamin have now gathered themselves against the Bnei Israel. Pretty bravely when you think about it, because this is one tribe against the whole of Bnei Israel. And when I say the whole of Bnei Israel, I mean it. Remember the beginning of the chapter. The author absolutely stressed to us that everybody was in this. Look right at the beginning of the chapter. Leon, just read us the first two psukim there.
And it was that in those days, have I got the right one? Yes. And it was that in those days there was no king in Israel.
No, chapter 20. Chapter 20.
Ah, yes, I thought I was looking at the wrong one. All the children of Israel went out, and the assembly gathered together as a single man from Dan to Beersheba and the land of Gilead to Hashem at Mitzpah. The chiefs of all the people and of all the tribes of Israel stood in the congregation of the people of God, 400,000 sword-wielding foot soldiers.
Okay, so you can see from there, we don't need to go over it again. We spoke about it in detail a few weeks ago. This was not a little thing. This was huge. 400,000 foot soldiers. Forget the fact that it's 400,000. It's a lot. However many it was a lot. And the author tells us, we're using all that language, that they were all in it together. So Binyamin is pretty brave, actually, if you think about it. You might say it's foolhardy, but they were pretty brave in standing them off, if you like. So let's have a look at the army of Binyamin. We're now up to verse 15.
The children of Benjamin from the cities were numbered that day at 26,000 sword-wielding men, besides the inhabitants of Gibeah, who were numbered at 700 choice men.
Okay, let's just stop there. So 26,700 against 400,000. My maths tells me that's about, on the top of my head, about a ratio of 15 to 1. Is that about right? About 26 times 15 or something, make about 400, yeah? So it's they're outnumbered by 15 to 1, according to these figures. Okay, carry on, Leon.
Among all these people, there were 700 choice left-handed men, all of whom could sling a stone at a hare and not miss.
Okay, let's stop there. Let's stop there. That's a really interesting pasuk. I also want to read this pasuk in a bit of detail because it's an interesting pasuk. Mikol ha'amazeh, 700 ish bachur iter yad yimino, which you have translated as left-handed. Okay, and look at the translation on the screen, which is the Chabad translation. 700 choice men with a shriveled right hand. Okay, and what does Rav Steinsaltz say? Rav Steinsaltz says 700 select men were left-handed. And then he says in the notes at the bottom, this was possibly a genetic trait or an acquired attribute. Okay, and he says something else, which I'm going to come back to in a minute. Now, to this day, we use the expression of iter, which means a shriveled up hand, iter, meaning left-handed, because the only people originally who used their left hands were people who couldn't use their right hands. It's not that long ago that even in Western society, certainly in the UK, as far as I know, it wasn't that long ago that left-handed people were made to be right-handed. Anybody here who's left-handed, was there anybody here who when you were at school were made to write with your right hand instead of your left hand?
I certainly wasn't.
You're probably not old enough, Michael.
I'm 70, give or take.
I think probably your parents' generation, I think it would have been the
certainly
case.
Certainly in Vienna, my father's my father said the left-handed people were forced to write with their right hands, etc.
Yeah,
but that's going back quite a way. That's going to the early 20s.
Okay, so we're talking 100 years ago. Even as recently as 100 years ago, left-handed people were made. What did you say, Stanley?
In Ukraine, it was up to probably 60s.
Up to the 60s?
Yes.
Wow. So there you go. That's like 50 years ago, 60 years ago. They were still making left-handed people, trying to make them right-handed. But what the Tanakh is telling us here is that there was a certain advantage to becoming to be left-handed. I remind you of our Shoftim Shir from many months ago now about our left-handed judge. Can anybody remember his name? Who was our left-handed judge?
Ehud.
Ehud was the left-handed judge who went into the palace, if you remember, and he managed to get through the security guard because he had his dagger on the right side instead of the left side, because he was left-handed. So he would put his hand across his body to pull out his dagger from the right side. So the Tanakh, if you remember, Sefer Shoftim made a big business about Ehud being left-handed.
It's called a cross draw.
Oh, thank you, a cross draw. Very nice. So can you imagine if I was to give you one guess as to which tribe our Judge Ehud came from? You would guess. Binyamin, correct, which is correct, because it seems that Binyamin have a lot of left-handers. And not only were they left-handed, these people, these were the top snipers. These were the guys that could sling a stone at a hairbreadth and not miss. That's what we're told in this pasuk. So they had two advantages. These were the top guys. First of all, they were left-handed, which gives them an advantage on the battlefield because people are not expecting left-handers, apparently. And secondly, these were super-duper snipers who could sling a stone at a hairbreadth and not miss. For the British people in this shiur, this reminded me of when I was a kid. There was a TV program called The Golden Shot. Everybody remember The Golden Shot with Bob Monkhouse? Yeah, I can see a few smiles there. Well, for those that don't remember it or are not British, this was a show whereby you had to virtually fire a bolt at basically a hairbreadth. And there would be this tiny little thing there, and you had to shoot this bolt at it, and you had to tell the guy that was shooting left a bit, right a bit, up a bit, down a bit. And then when you shot, if you shot and you got the hairbreadth and you shot it, then a whole load of money came down and you won lots of money. And it was called The Golden Shot. And when I read this about this pasuk about the hairbreadth, it sort of brought back memories to me of Bob Monkhouse and the Golden Shot. Right, on that piece of nonsense, I will allow Larry and Sharon to say what they have to say. I'm sure it's more interesting than that.
No, it's not. It's very quaint to hear about what was going on in the center of England. It's interesting that you spent so much time on this, because I read it without any looking at the commentary, and I immediately assumed that they were ambidextrous, that these were warriors who had trained themselves to be able to fight with both hands, to, hold the sword, the shield, the dagger, whatever, all the equipment that they had. And none of the genetics or the terrors of retraining lefties to righties or anything else, just that the good warriors were ambidextrous, and this meant that they were all capable warriors.
It's interesting that, because the actual way they're described as left-handed is not that they would use both hands, but iter yad yamino, which iter means weakness, and here it's translated on our screen as shriveled. So I think the psukim are telling us that these were left-handers, which is why Rav Steinsaltz mentions that it was genetic. And he also puts forward this idea that Ehud ben Gera, our left-handed judge from previously in Sefer Shoftim, was from the tribe of Binyamin. Yes, Howard?
Well, I think it's more sinister than that. It does say shriveled right hand. And I just wonder whether, it almost reminds me of the binding of the feet of Chinese women. They've got so many left-handers because they've got shriveled right hands. I just wonder whether they've been made to be left-handers by being treated when young to some punishment applied to the right hand, so that they would breed a cohort of left-handers for battle.
Okay, well, that's an interesting thought.
There's a large number of them.
Howard seeing a sinister approach to this, maybe. I can't say that's the case. But I think in terms of probabilities, the fact that it were all one tribe, I think we'll personally, I would go for the genetic answer, but I can't say that your sinister suggestion is beyond the realms of possibility. It's not. It's an interesting idea. Okay, let's move on. Leon, let's go on.
Besides Benjamin, the men of Israel were numbered at 400,000 sword-wielding men. All these were warriors. They got up and went to Bethel and inquired of God. The children of Israel said, "Who among us should advance to wage war against the children of Benjamin?" Hashem answered, "Judah should be first."
Okay, let's just stop there, because this is a very strange pasuk. Very strange pasuk. Who would like to give me an explanation of what is going on in this verse? They went up to Bethel and they asked God and said, "Who shall go up first for us to battle against the children of Benjamin?" And Hashem said, "Judah first." What is going on here? Philip?
Okay, there's something very strange here, because it's not correct. If you have an army of 400,000 fighters, that means to say that behind them you have at least another 200,000, another 2 million, 5-1 people who are in logistics. In modern armies today, and even in that time, armies they march on their stomachs. It's impossible that there were 400,000 fighting men.
Philip, I do wish you'd pay attention. We said many times that this figure of 400,000 is not to be taken literally. It's an exaggeration. We said that the Roman army at its most numerous numbered 425,000 soldiers at the most. It is impossible. You are quite right. Of course, Philip, it is impossible that there were 400,000. The number 400,000 is used here to express a very large number.
I mean, in the Israeli army today, there are only between 30 and 40,000 fighting men. It's an army without the standing army. The reserve army is more, but the standing army, you only have between 30 and 40,000 fighting men.
So that's an interesting point to give us an idea of the way these numbers are exaggerated. They are not to be taken literally. They are just there to tell us that it was a lot. Okay, who would like to explain what's going on in verse 18? Any offers? Any offers on what's going on in verse 18? How did they ask God? What was God doing in Bet El? Where should they have gone to ask God if they were going to ask a question? And did they ask the right question? So I would say, first of all, I don't know why they went to Bet El, because I would have expected them to go to Shiloh, because Shiloh is where the Mishkan was. Now, if you're going to go and ask God a question, the way that you did it in those days was to ask the Urim v'Tumim. Okay, that was the breast shield of the Kohen Gadol, which had all the different stones on it, and it was, you'd ask a question and the stones would light up and give you the answer. That's how the Midrash describes and the Gemara describes how the Urim v'Tumim worked. So that if that's the way you're going to ask God, then they should have gone to Shiloh. What were they doing in Bet El? If anybody can come up with the answer to that, I would be very happy to know the answer. Rav Steinsaltz says they did use the Urim v'Tumim. And so you have to say that the Urim v'Tumim must have been in Bet El and not in Shiloh. But I don't know why that would be the case, because the Mishkan was meant to be in Shiloh at that time. So that's my first question. The second question is, they asked a question: who shall go up for us first to battle against the children of Benjamin? Is that the right question? No, Leon, what do you think the right question is? You're giving a shake of the head there.
I've seen the notes, of course. First of all, Beit El, according to Radak, refers to Shiloh.
Ah, okay.
That's the first part.
Let's just stop
the
there.
Other part is
Let's
that
just
the
deal with
question
that point first then. That's interesting. Okay, so the Radak is obviously asked my question, or I should say I've asked the Radak's question, and that is, what's Beit El got to do with the Mishkan? So the Radak clearly doesn't have an answer, because he said, oh, when we say Beit El, we mean Shiloh. Well, of course, there's a bit of a problem with that, because there is a place called Beit El, which is not Shiloh. The word Beit El means the house of God. So what the Radak is saying here is, when it says they went to Bet El, they didn't go to the place Bet El, because there is a place Bet El. I'll try and find you a map of it in a minute. But they went to the place where the house of God was, which was Shiloh. Okay, so Radak has answered my question by explaining that Bet El is not Bet El, it's Shiloh. Okay. Now, my other question is, what was the correct question? The correct question was not who shall go up first to battle against the children of Benjamin.
It was the question they should have asked is, should we go to war in the first place?
Correct. That's absolutely right. We're not talking about a milchemet mitzvah here, are we? Are we talking about a milchemet reshut? There are two different types of war that are described by the rabbis. One is called a milchemet mitzvah, the war which is a mitzvah to go and do, which is to conquer the land. Any war which involves either conquering or defending the biblical land of Israel is called milchemet mitzvah. So when we were battling in 1948, that was a milchemet mitzvah. When we were battling in 1956 in the Sinai desert, that was not a milchemet mitzvah, technically. You can argue it was a milchemet mitzvah because it was a defensive thing, and if we hadn't done it, we'd have been attacked, and therefore we would have had to have defended the biblical land of Israel. But the fighting within the Sinai desert, which was not part of the biblical land of Israel, was not a milchemet mitzvah, technically. 1967, you could argue the same thing. In parts of the war were milchemet mitzvah, part were not. The various different wars where we've gone into Lebanon actually were milchemet mitzvah, because as you know, the biblical land of Israel, the biblical borders include southern Lebanon. So ironically, there can be milchemet mitzvah, which is outside of the borders of modern day Israel, and we can have a milchemet reshut, a non-mitzvah war, which is within the borders of Israel. That's just a quirk of the borders of the modern day state of Israel versus the biblical borders of Israel. I'll come to you in a sec, Howard. So the milchemet mitzvah is when you're defending the borders of the land of Israel, biblical land of Israel. Milchemet reshut is where you are, the reshut means permission. So you have permission to go to war, but you're not obliged to go to war. And that is an expansive war where you go to war outside the borders of the biblical land of Israel, which David HaMelech did. But there is nowhere that says that a war within the land of Israel against your brothers is something which is either permission or a mitzvah. So surely the question they should have been asking, if they're going to go and ask God a question, the question they should have been asking is, Binyamin, or more specifically, the people of Giv'ah have done a terrible thing. Is it permitted for us, should we go and fight them and deal with this nevalah, this disgrace, this terrible thing that has happened in Israel? Should we, do we have an obligation? Is this the will of God? Remember, we spoke about it last week, doing that which is correct and upright and good in the eyes of God. That's the question they should have been asking, not making an assumption that this is the correct thing to do. And, oh, by the way, God, we've decided to go and battle it out against Binyamin. Who do you think we should send as the vanguard? That's not the right question. The question is, this terrible thing has happened. How should we deal with it? Should we attack Binyamin? And that was not the question that they asked. Yes, Howard.
Well, I'm certainly with you on the last point, but on the question of the Sinai campaign of 1956, I say this as a compliment, Johnny, but you're too young to remember. Israel was suffering a death by 1,000 cuts. So that's not, I mean, you can fight abroad in order to preserve the homeland.
I did qualify that as when I said it, but yes, point taken.
I must have missed the qualification.
Yes. Okay. So the question, yes, Johnny Howard.
I think Rab Steinsaltz is explaining it a different way. He says that I think then should the whole lot of them gone in to attack Binyamin, or they're asking God which of us should go in. They're saying that the tribe of Benjamin is only 1/10 the size, so there's only about 270,000 soldiers anyhow. But should we all go and schmeiss them all together, or should we give them an equal chance, one against one?
Yeah, that's what Rav Steinsaltz says. But I think if you read what he says, which says as follows, they did not ask whether they should go to war or if they would win, as they were confident with regard to these matters. They merely sought to determine which tribe should attack first. Since the army of Benjamin was less than 1/10 of the size of the Israelite forces, they were certain that it was not necessary for all of the Israelites to participate in the initial attack. And I think that Rav Steinsaltz is implicit in his criticism there. I don't think he's explicit in it, but I think it's implicit that they were confident in regard to these matters, and I don't think they should have been confident. I don't think they should have taken it upon themselves without seeking God's counsel, as it were, to attack their brothers. We've spoken about this many times. that the concept of Jew against Jew is a horrendous thought. Why were we all so terribly disturbed by the assassination of Rabin, apart from the fact that he was assassinated, which was a terrible thing? The fact is it was done by another Jew. Jew killed Jew. And this is a terrible thing. And here we have the potential, and well, it wasn't just the potential was realized. Tens of thousands of Jews were killed in this civil war. And the people did not see it fit to go and ask, as it were, ask God's counsel. If they hadn't asked God anything, you could argue that, you know, they weren't that way inclined. They weren't that from, you know, they weren't that bothered to go and ask God. But they're going to ask God who should go first. So it's not that they're not asking God, but they're asking the wrong question. Surely they should have been asking for permission, for a blessing, for advice as to whether they should take this very, very serious and potentially harmful step.
God gave them an answer, though. God said Judah should go first. He didn't say, why didn't you ask me first before you?
Well, I think
he gave a direct answer.
He gave a direct answer to a direct question, but I think that what we see happens next is interpreted as God's answer. Paul?
Except that they were not doing this. Is not a civil war in the sort of a strife. You know, who's going to be the leader? It's a punishment for their immoral behaviour, and as such, that's what it was. It wasn't a civil war per se, and therefore they were carrying out a mitzvah of righting wrongs.
Okay, so that's their philosophy. They're righting wrongs.
It's a milchemet mitzvah, is what I'm saying.
Okay, so it's a milchemet mitzvah on the basis of hochiach tochiach et achecha. You shall surely rebuke your brother. Okay, all right. I'm willing to accept that they were so outraged by this treatment of this woman that they felt it their duty to go and sort this out, and that they didn't need to go and ask first. Then they're asking who shall go first on what grounds, Paul. Let me just follow this through with Paul to get your thoughts on that. Why are they going to ask who should go first?
It's a tactical issue. How best to fulfill this mitzvah?
Right. So they're asking. Okay. So they're so okay. That's what I suppose what Steinsaltz is saying. They were so confident that this was a mitzvah, they didn't need to ask that. They just wanted to know how to do it. Okay. I think it's false behavior, but I understand the logic behind that. Yes, Philip.
Might Judah not have responded by saying ours is not to reason why, ours is to do and die? Because they were always the first. They were always the first, Judah. Judah was actually the brother who saved Joseph, as far as I remember. Or was it Reuben? I can't remember.
Well, Reuben wanted to save him altogether. Yeah. Judah saved him from being killed, and it was his idea to send him down to slavery.
He was the one who always took the initiative, wasn't he, Judah? Yeah. And that's why maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu said he should go first.
Yes, I mean, it's not surprising that the answer was Judah, because, as you say, he's the one that usually takes the initiative. David Marks.
Yeah, first problem is on Shiloh, as you said. I'm not buying the Radak, and I'm sure you're not either. If we look in Pasuk 27 of the same chapter, it says there that the Aaron was in Bethel at that time. What's the Aaron doing in Bethel when the Mishkan is in Shiloh? And the Urim and Tumim should also be in Shiloh. I'm also not buying the Radak, because you'll find in Parashat Vayechi, the Rashbam there says that Shiloh and Shechem are the same place, and Shechem and Bethel are miles away from each other. Going back to Yehuda, again, the article that you couldn't read that was so small, but suggests that this story is taken from so many other stories in the Tanakh. Look at how Sefer Shoftim opens, the very first and second psukim of Sefer Shoftim. Who will go for us to war against the Canaanites? Obviously, Yehuda, for the reasons that Philip has just suggested. The other problem that we didn't discuss earlier was Bnei Israel turn around to Binyamin and say, hand this guy over so we can kill him. Not hand him over so we can try him and see if he is Chayav Misa.
Okay, that's an interesting point. That's an interesting point. Lots of interesting points there. Let's stick with the first one first. Can you see the map on the screen? Yeah, okay. So I found out this is our favorite map. We've used this many times before. There's our map. And as you can see, Bet El and Shiloh are different places. So David is quite right. I don't buy the Radak either. But it's clear that the Radak would have also known this. And therefore, I think that you have to say, reading between the lines of the Radak, that the Radak also had a big problem with this. And the only way that he could explain it was that when we say Bet El, we're not referring to Bet El, the place, but we're referring to Bet El, the thing, the Bet El, the house of God, i.e. Mishkan. It's not entirely satisfactory, but I guess, and in the absence of, excuse me, in the absence of anything else, that has to be an explanation, because otherwise we're left with the question that David has just raised and that I raised, which is what is the Urim V'Tumim doing in Bet El when the rest of the Mishkan is in Shiloh? So go on, David.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's the Da'at Mikra suggests that the modern day place is northeast of Ramallah, which fits, and it's a place called Beitin. So it's obviously an Arab village, Beitin, northeast of Ramallah.
So that's Shiloh or that's Bet El?
That's Bet El.
Right, does that fit on our map here? It doesn't really, does it? Because you'd expect it to be over here where my
it'd be northwest rather than northeast on your map.
Yeah, you'd expect it to be over here. Interesting. We need to do a bit more. We need to do a bit more research on the geography here. But I merely point out that from this map that Bet El and Shiloh are separate places, not the same place. And I think the Radak is saying that Bet El is referring to the house of God as opposed to Bet El, the place. So that I think is interesting on there. Now, the other thing about Judah going first, of course, everything that Philip said is right. There you go. I said it. Everything that Philip said is right. That Judah is the one that takes the initiative. That's why, of course, Judah became the tribe of Malchut, of kingship. But there's also a geographical thing here as well. Although they've gathered here at Mitzpah, which is over here, funnily enough, more or less where Bet El is on this map, which I suppose would be against the Radak's opinion that it was in Shiloh, because Mitzpah, as we said, is on the border of Binyamin over here. And if that's the case, it's very close to Bet El. And therefore, it makes sense that they went to Bet El to ask Hashem. So maybe we would say, if we were writing well, I don't know, I can't speak for you. If I was writing a commentary here, I would say that would be an explanation would be that actually the Mishkan was no longer in Shiloh. It had moved to Bet El. And in fact, that is why Bet El is called Bet El, because the Mishkan moved to Bet El Mitzpah is very close by. And when they wanted to ask a question of God, they went to Bet El, where the Mishkan was, and therefore the Urim V'Tumim were there as well. Now, I've only just thought of that as we've been speaking, so that might be complete nonsense, but that seems to me to actually fit. And you know that we've also spoken about how names come about in Tanakh, names of people, names of places. It's certainly not beyond the realms of possibility that the name Bet El here was given the name because the Mishkan spent some time there. So that's my theory, which has only just been formulated in my head. So I'm willing for it to be shot down at any time. So there we go for the moment. Right, the other thing I was going to say is that look at Judah. Judah's the biggest tribe locally here. We know about Dan. Dan has gone all the way up here to Dan. And so he's out of the picture. So we've got Yehuda as the main tribe here. Although everybody has gathered, we note from the beginning of the chapter, everybody has gathered. Judah's the biggest tribe. It's the most advanced tribe. It's the one that takes the initiative. The answer that Hashem gives of Yehuda is obvious in a way. So let's go back to the chapter and verse 19. Let's see what happened.
The children of Israel rose up in the morning and encamped against Gibeah. The men of Israel went out to war against Benjamin, and the men of Israel arrayed themselves for war against Gibeah. The children of Benjamin came out of Gibeah, and on that day they destroyed 22,000 men of Israel to the ground. The people, the men of Israel, strengthened themselves and continued to array themselves for war in the place where they had arrayed themselves on the first day. The children of Israel went up.
Let's just stop there. So that was a bit of a surprise, wasn't it? I mean, when you first read this, you don't see that coming. You've got this enormous Israelite army going out to battle with an army of one tribe, much less in number. And what you don't see coming is that Binyamin actually win the battle. They win the first battle, and they kill 22,000 people. Again, forget the numbers being literal. It means a lot. If you want to work out percentages, 5% of the army. 5% of the army, equivalent today. If you work it out on Philip's figures, let's say 40,000 in the Israeli army today, 400,000 supposedly here, so 10 times more. This will be the equivalent of us, God forbid, losing 2,200 soldiers in one day in current terms.
Wasn't it just Yehuda that went in first, Johnny? Or...
Oh, well, yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
So it's just against Yehuda. It's not against the whole army. And Binyamin were the real serious fighters.
Well, they certainly came out on top here. But what I'm pointing out is the losses that we've had. 22,000 here. If we apply our factors of 10, it's the equivalent of us today losing over 2,000 soldiers. Now, Philip, you'll probably be able to tell me how many soldiers did we lose in the Yom Kippur War?
3,000 in the first day.
2,800 dead and about 7,000 injured.
In the whole war?
Yeah, which was a hell of a lot.
Right.
For a country of 2,800,000.
War, which was our worst war, in the whole war, we lost 2,800.
No, the worst war for Israel was the War of Independence, because there were 600,000 Jews in Israel, and we lost 6,000 Jews, which was 1% of the population. The worst war for Israel was the War of Independence.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the numbers lost on this first day are not dissimilar to the numbers lost in the whole of the Yom Kippur War. in sort of in terms of ratios.
Okay, can I make a point?
Yes.
Can I make a point? It's Faye.
Yes, Faye.
So I think it supports, number one, the fact question of God. And if we had asked God if we should be fighting and would we win, maybe we would have won an outcome. It also supports the fact that it was probably just the tribe of Yehuda, which were not necessarily the warriors, they were just the leaders in every way. And Binyamin were warriors, like them against a whole army. It was them against one tribe. It was tribe against tribe and a better equipped tribe. But one where we were supposed to go to Shiloh and ask if we're going to win and, you know, should we fight? And if we fight, would we win? So we asked the wrong question, and it wasn't the whole army. I think these are the two valid points.
And I think those 2 points are absolutely right. And the Meforshim say the same thing. The Meforshim say that the reason that they were not successful was because they didn't ask the right question and they didn't ask God whether they should fight or not. And they were number one, they were overconfident in their understanding of this milchemet mitzvah, as Paul has described it. They were overconfident in their ability by saying, well, we don't need all of us. Let's just choose one tribe because we can do it without too much bother because they're not that great, the Binyamin soldiers. We only need one tribe to do it. So the Mefarshim say exactly as Faye has said, that the error of the children of Israel was one of overconfidence. And of course, we see that predicted in the Torah in a very famous pasuk, Kochi ve'otzem yadi asayit achayel hazeh. The power of, unless I will say, the power of my hand has achieved all of this. In other words, it's all because I'm such a clever fellow or a strong fellow or a tactical fellow. It's all down to me, Kochi ve'otzem yadi. And this, the Mefarshim say, was God's answer to that, that they were routed on the first day. So we
can I ask you one question?
Yes, Nahum.
The initiation of this situation where the body's cut up and taken all over the place, did we learn? I mean, maybe I missed it. Did we learn that anybody investigated this the occurrence? How she certainly was killed, and how, I mean, we know she was raped, but do we know the circumstances of her death and the chopping her up? Where are the witnesses? Where is the information that normal people would look at it and say, oh, that's what happened?
Well, I guess the Levite himself was the source of the information, because he was the only one that knew that what had happened, and he was the only one that knew who chopped her up. It was him.
So why should we start a war based on what one person decided, rather than have an inquiry and have the witnesses and have it all taken apart, so we know that this is not a war of nothing? Maybe that's why so many of them died.
Okay, that's a fair point. Somebody else raised that point earlier on, that they wanted, I can't remember who it was now, somebody raised a point that said that when the Bnei Israel asked for this people to be taken out, they asked them to be taken out to be killed, not to be tried. I can't remember who it was that said that, but that was a very good point. And that's more or less the same point that you're making, Nahum, is that they haven't actually investigated this, seemingly.
Okay, sorry.
Right, Marcel's been patiently with his hand up there. Unmute, Marcel. Marcel, we can't hear you. Marcel, unmute. There we go.
Just a couple of interesting points. Both Benjamin and Yehuda were the tribes of the Malchut, of the king, and both of them were the children of Rachel and Leah, not of Bilpah.
Okay. All right.
Just for reference.
Who else had their hand up a minute ago? I saw somebody, Howard.
Well, Nahum's right to be scandalized. but maybe they just didn't have the concept of an inquest, and they certainly didn't have the concept of proportionality. To go to war over the death of one girl is not proportional, but it's a most inglorious period of time for the Jews, not least because of the Civil War. But if you eventually get to the end of the book, you get this phrase again: everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And we've been through this before recently.
Yeah, that is the explanation of what happened. That is the explanation. That is why all these things happened. I'd like to just challenge you on one thing there about proportionality. And I can see Helen has sat up at this point. Helen, would you like to give us your views? I'm very interested to hear your views. Unmute yourself.
Hi, I've actually been making notes as the morning's been going along, and I was going to save them for when you were discussing later, which I can do if you want.
Give us a taster. Give us a taster.
Okay, so my taster is that it was nothing to do with the woman at all. It was the fact that one of the important men his property had been destroyed, and he was angry about that and got all his mates to come and teach the tribe of Benjamin a lesson. And men being the way they are, once their minds are made up, they're going to go ahead and do it anyway, regardless. And they must have known that Benjamin's reputation, the tribe of Benjamin's reputation about the way they fought. So the whole thing was about the insult to the whole concept of hospitality, to other to travelers, and a macho. It was a whole macho thing.
That was the word that was coming into my mind as you were speaking. That so your take on it is that nothing to do with a woman anyway. It could have just been. It could have just been his donkey or his any other piece of his property, and they weren't outraged that a woman was raped. They were outraged that the Levites' property was misappropriated.
Yeah, and it also violated the principle of hospitality.
Okay.
Which I think was a very important thing at that time.
Okay. The point is well made, and I'm going to discuss it when we come to our discussion, because I think there's a counter view as well. But I can certainly understand and I suppose predict that might have been your approach.
I'm sorry, I'm so predictable.
No. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. Okay, great. All right. I want to just before we finish, just so that we can just round this off, just want to do one more pasuk, pasuk 23.
The children of Israel went up and cried before Hashem until evening. They inquired of Hashem, saying, "Should I once again approach for war against the children of Benjamin, my brother?" Hashem said, "Go up against him."
Now the whole thing's changed around, hasn't they? Suddenly, first of all, Benjamin's their brother, and suddenly they're asking God whether they should go up against him. Their overconfidence as seems to have evaporated. And I think that pasuk is a very interesting pasuk. And I'm going to leave it there. Sharon and Larry have a hand up, so we'll take that and any other comments. But we're going to leave it on a cliffhanger here. Don't read the rest of the pasukim because you'll spoil it. And we'll carry on next week, please God. Yes, Sharon or Larry.
It's Sharon. Just the thought on, I think it was Helen's last comment just now about hospitality. We think of hospitality as a virtue and a mitzvah and all of that. But actually, if you carry it further to, for example, the things that brought the colonies in America together, part of it was a unified currency and another side was a unified transportation. That if people were not able to travel throughout the land of the tribes with some kind of safety, then we were in no way going to be able to form into a nation. And I think that part of Judges is not only the fact that we didn't have a judicial system, but that we didn't have the ability to trust each group, each region enough to cohere. And that ultimately we needed a king like King David, who united us finally into one nation, short though it was. And part of that is transportation and commerce.
Okay, that's a very, very important point. And I think that if I had to sum up the message that Sefer Shoftim gives us, which I will do when we finish it, it will include that idea that we were a fragmented people, and that the need for a unifying system, whether that be a monarchy or whether that be some kind of dictatorship, or a prophet of the caliber of Shmuel who comes next, it was crying out for something. So the point that Sharon has made there, we will come back to when we finally get to the end of Sefer Shoftim and we sum it all up. So, any other comments before we call it a day for today?
Do you think that the brothers' rivalry to each other from when they were in Egypt and what Joseph did, and Benjamin was the brother, do you think that had some bearing on this behavior, that they were willing to wage war against Benjamin as if they were taking retribution against Joseph in some way? Because they really
think that my own view is that the sibling rivalry, which we see in Sefer Bereshit, is responsible for a huge number of disasters in our people up until today. We haven't learned those lessons, and I think that is part of it. I am giving a talk to the AACI group. I can't remember when exactly. It's a Sunday morning. And anyway, I can't remember exactly when it is, but I'll look it up. And the title of my talk is Sibling Rivalry in the Book of Genesis. So if you're interested, you can join that.
Are you going to use that?
It will certainly be part of it, yes. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Okay, any other comments? David Mark.
Yeah, Nachum has just hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
The sibling rivalry. You referred before to Binyamin's Yitraf. This is, Rashi says this is a prophecy of this particular incident. And think back, the only one of the brothers who had nothing to do with the sale of Yosef, because he was at home with his dad, was Binyamin. And who are the only two children of Rachel? Yosef and Binyamin.
Yeah, so what it teaches us, I think, is that as a people, we have, from the very, very beginning, suffered from a dreadful sibling rivalry, which we've not yet sorted out. We still are arguing amongst ourselves, left versus right, Dati versus Chiloni, Haredi versus everybody else, reform versus progress, you name it. We just can't do it, can we? And we haven't learned our lessons.
But we're not unique.
No, well, we know, well, we should be. We should be, Howard. That's our role in life, is to be unique, to be Or LaGoyim. We're meant to be unique.
We're not unique in that respect either.
No, but we should be unique in the respect that we shouldn't be like that. That's our job in life.
As long as we realise we're not the only ones.
No, we're not the only ones. It's true. Right. Okay. I will.
Of the 10 Commandments, the last commandment. It's a violation of the 10 Commandments. The last commandment. For sure. Okay.
Okay. Let's. I will stop there. We'll stop the recording now.